if you go into a physician and they say, hey, you're sick and here's the things we can do. Well, they don't just tell you to, dartboard it and guess which way to do. They'll say, well, if you do this, here's the side effects and here's the likelihood and here's the risks and here's the benefits. You've got to do the same thing really in anything in business. But I think technology has suffered from that lack of communication probably more than a lot of other areas.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. Today I'm joined all the way from Tennessee. I've got the founder and chief contributor at Developreneur and also founder at RB Consulting. Welcome to the show, Rob Broadhead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. And before we get into the sort of meat and veg of what you do, who you help and how you help them, could you give us a little bit of background about what's got you to where you are today?
I've had a fun journey, I guess. I started out as a one of those kids that liked technology, and that sort of developed into going into college and majoring in computer science, and then started my career more or less in the what was at that time the big six consulting companies, and fairly quickly realized that I like the consulting side of my work. I like doing technology. I like solving problems. And then after I was not even 10 years into it, decided to start my own company, started RB Consulting, went out, consulted on my own. I've been doing that for a little over 20 years now. I guess almost starting to approach 25 years, and have sort of focused on, although I've worked with big companies, like Fortune 100, it's much more focused on entrepreneurs, small businesses, maybe even mid-sized businesses, because it tends to be a good fit where I can bring that big business IT knowledge into small companies and help them figure out where they can use technology maybe where they're not used to it. And particularly because, if you're running a business, you're thinking about your business. You probably not, unless it is a technology business, that's not your cup of tea. That's not your strength. And so it's just like law and accounting and finance and some of those other areas where it's just a part of business. And if it's not your strength, it helps to have somebody come in that can say, hey, here's some of the tools that exist. Here's some of the things that are some gotchas or some things that you need to look out for. So it's not only guiding you to where you can grow, but also helping you avoid mistakes that are pretty common. And as I've sort of grown my business, initially it was much more focused on just, hey, what's your job? What's your project? Let's get that done. And as I started talking to customers and found more and more that the customers I was talking to had already tried this one or more times, whatever their project was, and they had struggled through it. And a lot of times in reviewing it with them and talking about their experiences, there was a sort of like an education side of what they had missed, because they had a vision. They didn't really know how to get there, and so they just said, well, I think this is it. This is what I want to do. And they didn't have consultants or vendors that would talk to them about, is that really the best approach? Hey, here's some other options. Here's some things that make sense. And also it's asking the right questions. I often go back to like the idea of building a house. There's a difference between saying, build me a house, and that's wide open. They could build you a little shack. They could build you a mansion, versus, I need a house with, so many bedrooms and so many bathrooms. And I have to have, maybe phone and internet, and maybe I want solar panels, or what all the different things you can put into a house. Well, if you don't really know that those are options, then you don't know how to tell the builder, I need these, and then there's gonna be some things that just don't make sense. So there's gonna be things that's like, well, yeah, you don't want to have a bathroom sitting out on a porch somewhere or something like that. There's certain things that just don't make sense. And if you don't know that, you don't know it. You don't know what you don't know. And you rely on that that professional, that person that's providing expertise to help you ask the right questions. And that was really where I started getting more and more into a lot of often into like smaller companies and organizations, and working more with the really more like the owners, the leadership, and even though working with the technical side, but really a lot of it's a focus on the owners, the business side,
Right.
to help really understand what the processes are, help them understand what their processes are and what their needs are, so that can be translated into technical speak essentially, and then build them a solution that makes sense for them.
Yeah, it's actually one of the just written a word down there that you touched upon, which is translation, and I think that I reflected on some of my roles in the past, that translation between the customer, whoever that might be in front of you, either internal or external, and the technical side, and you often need that middle person who knows enough. I used to say I know enough geek to to translate your needs into what they need to actually provide to you, because quite often from a technical side there's the requirements, how many pages do you need and what font and blah, blah, blah. And actually a customer's going, I want a website or I want a product and I want it to do this for me. They don't know how to translate that from one to another, and I think that's a really valuable service to be offering people, particularly in areas like tech, where the investments can be significant, even at the lower levels as well as the larger organizations as well, right?
Oh, agreed. And it very much is. It there's definitely, I guess, an art or a skill to doing that translation side, to being in the middle, because there are going to be some things where it's like, if you ask a customer what font do you want on your website, they have no idea, probably don't care, unless that's their business in some way, form, or fashion. And so they're expecting you to guide them through those, to say, if you choose Comic Sans, it's not going to be a very professional looking site, or if you choose this color scheme, or if you choose these ways to approach your solution, here's the challenges that you're going to be. And sometimes it's simple as like having three options. Like, if you do this, it's going to be very expensive. It look great, this is the high-end sports car version of it. If you do this, it's going to be functional, but this is like the low end, just get you from point A to point B car, and then this is a mid-range. It's things like that. It's not just asking questions, just sort of like I sort of refer to it as like as a 2-year-old child. It's like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? It's that conversation that is not only asking the question, but also giving them enough context if they don't have it, so that they can answer it in an intelligent way. It's sometimes you get asked a question like, I don't know, I don't have any basis for what my decision would be, but this allows them to understand that. And it's just like any profession, it's like a healthcare. If you go into a physician and they say, hey, you're sick, and here's the things we can do. Well, they don't just tell you to, dartboard it and guess which way to do. They'll say, well, if you do this, here's the side effects, and here's the likelihood, and here's the risks, and here's the benefits. And you've got to do the same thing really in anything in business. But I think technology has suffered from that lack of communication probably more than a lot of other areas. I don't think people realized it early on, and then suddenly everybody just, instead of fixing it, just like too many people seem to just think that's just what it is. There's no way around it. You can never have business and technology talk, and it's sort of giving up on the fight before actually going out there and fixing it.
Yeah. I've had this conversation previously. Well, my wife's in the world of learning and development, and those sort of learning management systems, as a specific example, they're a large system that requires a heavy investment. And actually, when the people who are going in and scoping out those systems, they kind of know what they want. Generally, they haven't got experience, or the company hasn't bought one, or certainly hasn't bought one for a while, and the world has changed massively around them. And when they go to ask the questions as to which system is right for me, quite often the only person to ask is the vendor. Now, the vendor isn't going to say, don't buy my system, buy theirs. But that's someone who sits in the middle and says, actually, based on your needs, those options are in front of you. But as you say, the risk and reward is X, Y, and Z.
And that's fine. I just went through that with a partner on the podcast side of selecting a learning management system. We're sort of the same way. We had built content for a long time, and we said, okay, well, here's sort of what we want. And the first week or two of looking into it, it was okay, what's the difference? Yeah, and as somebody we finally had to, because we didn't have somebody that said, here's what, here's an expert that we trusted, because it was the expert from each of the vendors, which they're going to say our product's the best, funny enough. Yeah. And so we had to go in and we had to, which you have to do these things. We had to invest the time to sit down and walk through trials and demos. And we built out we took a couple sample classes and built them across 3 or 4 LMSs, and then talked to each other, compared notes, and then finally got down to one that, fit our needs. But that's part of it too, is that there is an investment that you have to make in those kinds of things, that even if you get a consultant that comes in and says, okay, this is what I think it needs to be, there's still needs, you have to inform them enough so that you're really making decisions. You can't just hand that decision. I recommend you don't just hand that decision off. Yeah. And so that sometimes is a problem, because you get into areas where it's like, this is a part of my business I don't really want to deal with. I don't want to understand enough about accounting to go select an accounting system. Yet, depending on where your position is, you may have to spend enough time to understand what that is, what that means to your staff or your resources that work with that, so that you can, make the right decision. Or if not, you've got to find very, highly trusted people to help you with that process.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. And what's some of the things that you took from your time in that Big Six environment, that some that you've brought with you, and maybe some of the things that you've left behind?
Oh, wow. One of the things that it's a negative kind of thing, but just because you pay more for something doesn't mean you're going to get a better product. That was one of the big things I was amazed at, which is, I think, a lot of what I brought with me, is that, to me, there were a lot of people that were, the cost to their customers was far beyond the value that they brought. Right. And it was really just buying a name. It's really just, hey, it's almost like virtue signaling, as they say now. It's like, hey, I've got this company and we're paying a ton of money. And that was really almost all they wanted. That's like, okay, we've got that prestige, but it doesn't solve the problem. And I think that's one of the things I've brought forward, is talking to companies about focusing on why are you doing this? What is your reason for doing this? If it's just to say, hey, you're checking a box to say we use this vendor or we have this product. Okay. If you're solving a problem, let's talk about that problem. How do we really solve it? And let's try to clear out whatever's in your head and what your friends and advertisers tell you, but what is it you're trying to solve? What is the best solution for that? And really focusing on that and keeping that why throughout the project, to say, okay, why are we doing this? Because it's really easy for especially entrepreneurs, I think, and maybe it's because I have that same thing, as the sort of the shiny object syndrome, where you're working on something and you say, oh, hey, there's this cool feature we can add, or this new service we can do. And the next thing you know, that's like, oh, let's bring it on. Let's just do it. But that can detract from whatever your primary, why is. And I think you see a lot of business experts that will talk about this, where they say, all right, you got to, focus on your business, try not to get spread too thin or get off brand or out of areas that your strength, because you can actually hurt your overall organization sometimes by taking those risks that really they're not really going to pay off for you anyways. Yes, it may be a revenue stream, but it really detracts so much from what your customers think you are, that it becomes a lead weight around you.
The other side you touched on a little bit there was around you help people through the podcast that you've got, which is the developreneurs side. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that, and who it's there for and how it helps them.
That is the more technical focus. The developreneur came from the merging of developer and entrepreneur. And that was from experience of finding that some of the best, actually the majority of the best developers that are out there, the software developers, not just people writing code, but people that can develop solutions and systems, also have an entrepreneurial side to them. They are problem solvers, which is really what entrepreneurs tend to be. And merging those two is also a great way to combine the business and the technology side to sort of drive that middle translation layer. And so that's a lot of what Developreneur is we talk about business side of stuff, but we can get very businessy, we can get very techy. And in doing that, we try to make sure that the people that are our listeners and the blog readers, and then we've got our school that we start up that's a variety of courses, is to try to find ways to get both sides of that so that you're exposed to the business side, you're exposed to the technology side, because there is a lot of value if you're a technologist to understand the business and the businesses that you're in. That is invaluable in helping your customers. But also as a business, it's becoming to a point where you've got to have some little bit of a foundation of knowledge of technology to understand the path you're going down. And there's buzzwords all over. It's, the cloud or Internet of Things or all these buzzwords that keep changing. Understanding those enough to know this is something that may be beneficial to us, or this is completely outside of our realm at least. But then as you get, maybe not if you're CEO, but if you're down even at a mid-level business manager, vice president or director or something like that, then there's still a need to understand some of those technology processes, because I think it helps you talk to them and reach across that translation barrier as well. So it starts getting everybody on the same page. It makes it a lot easier to directly communicate with the we'll call it the other side of that equation.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. I'm going to be checking it out, because I've found myself, as I say, in that sort of translation layer over the years, and my experience with working with McLaren, and I was working alongside a couple of the big four as they are now, taking those technologies out to business, and found myself in that role, which is trying to understand what are the business needs of the client. It's like we had in an almost lucky situation there. We didn't have a product to sell. We were looking to develop with them and collaborate and do that sort of thing, which is a different environment to we've got a product. Let's see how Hammer can find a nail in your business. But no, it's a wonderful world, and I think the ability to translate business needs into technical requirements is a core skill that's going to be really relevant going forward as well. So, just following up then a little bit on the RB consulting piece, you mentioned you work primarily with entrepreneurial sides. What's a typical customer to you, and how are you helping them? What's an engagement look like?
Typically, it's a lot of times it's entrepreneurs, it's small and medium-sized businesses, because the best time for me to step in, the best customers are those that are at a starting point, or a not a pivot necessarily, as they would say, but a changing point where they're either starting out and trying to figure out, what do we want to do? What do we need? Where can technology help us? Or a lot of times, which is almost better, is companies that have been working for a little bit, they've been doing things, and now they're trying to grow. They've sort of got their processes in place, but maybe they haven't nailed them all down. And they know that we can't do it with what we're doing. We can't keep doing with the people we have. We can't scale this, as it's typically called. And so that's when a lot of times it's technology becomes a good fit, because it says, okay, these processes that you do, there are ways to automate those, or to simplify them, or to reduce the time or the costs, or all of the factors around that. And that now allows you to take this, if you think of business like a big ball or a big cake, take these big slices that you've been spending your time on and your resources, and shrink those down so that now you can free those resources up to go do other things, to grow your business. It's, often it's the difference between working in your business versus on your business. So this is finding ways, and there's a lot of things that companies can think of off the top of their head. It's things like automating customer service, or outsourcing payroll, or outsourcing fulfillment, or invoicing, or things like that, which you can outsource them. So you can buy a product. There's so many different ways to find a solution that fits your business. And that's where I really like to step in, because I say, all right, let's start with a conversation. Where are you at? Where do you want to be short term, in 6 months or a year? And then let's also talk about where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, because those will impact what you do. It's, again, if you think about a house, or think even better, like a city, if you want it to grow, you've got to have enough land to grow that out. So you've got to sort of be planning for that way before you actually get to that point. And it's the same way with software, is that you need to be thinking about not only where you want to be now and this year, but where does it make the most sense to invest in things so that you're prepared 3 years or 5 years or 10 years out.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the situations I've come across as well, that sort of build or buy. Do we build in house and start our own system, or do we buy off the shelf, or where do we go? And is that something that you talk to people about? Or?
Very often, build versus buy has really been a big. It's become more of a conversation in the last 5 or 10 years, basically. The idea of cloud solutions and software as a service, those things allow companies that used to not have any ability to reach certain levels of technology and services and software. Now you can get into it. You can get in like a Salesforce thing or NetSuite or some of those, that their entry can be so much lower than the multi-million-dollar projects you would have needed to do 10, 15 years ago. And then there's so many other tools that are even, more so, that are, when you look at like simple, like instead of ERP systems, but things like your accounting systems, or having a website and hosting your website, having e-commerce. When you look at some of the tools and sites that are out there, there are ways to get into that very quickly and dip a toe in, and then also be able to grow it so that you can say, okay, this covers me for now, but because it is this software as a service, because it allows itself to grow and its customers to grow, it can grow with you. So you don't have to do this huge investment now. Instead, you can do a portionably reasonable investment now, go invest the time, learn how to do it, and then that tool can grow with you. So that build versus buy is a lot of conversations come around that, because there are both sides that, where you'll come into a customer that thinks they have to buy, that there's just no way they can build it. And yet there are ways that it can be done simply and cost effectively enough for them to actually have their own custom solution. And sometimes it makes sense because that's their secret sauce of their business. And on the flip side, there's some companies that I've dealt with that are sure they have to do this custom thing because nobody else does it. And I'll go show them 10 other products that do that today, that do that better now than they would be able to do it 2 years from now, because it's just, people have spent time in that product solving that problem, and it works exactly for that customer.
Yeah, it's all, as you say, the sort of risk and reward element comes right back into it, doesn't it? In terms of, do you keep control in house, or do you actually run the risk of not being able to service that? You lose key people who know how the system was coded or whatever it might be. And obviously buying in allows you to have that service level that goes along with the larger pieces of software that come out there. So that's where people can get the opportunity to scale that aftermarket service and all those wonderful areas as well, isn't it?
Cool. Yeah, and that's how, that risk reward, that goes back to the earlier conversation about making sure they understand the risks and the rewards. But then there's also a lot of times there's a challenge of, you're in a situation where you want to be able to control that piece of your business, but you also really don't want to be you would love to have somebody else responsible for it. But then it's like, well, but if they're responsible and they fail me, then I'm in trouble. And how do I get control? So it's sort of that figuring out what you really do want to have your hands on and be able to tightly control, versus those things that you would like to, but if you can find a trusted vendor or advisor, then you say, okay, good, that's even better, is I can put that off to you. I know that you will take care of it. But there's that, having that comfort level that they're going to be able to do it and respond in the level that your customers need is there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of, conversations and research and understanding that has to go into that, because that's building trust at that point.
Yeah. And I think bringing that value of having gone through all of that previously, because you've had the same conversations about similar systems with previous clients, or you've got the ability when a new system or new version comes in, because you've done that research and because you've got the technical capabilities, that value of being able to go in and accelerate the process for companies. I can see that being a real game changer for particularly that small to medium sized organization as well. Yeah, brilliant. So if we changed it around a bit and said, how do you get help with your performance? Who helps you perform, and how do you keep on top of your game, particularly when it comes to the pace of IT change? How do you keep on top of that?
It is a challenge. I do a like a sort of a shotgun approach. As I use a lot of different sources for that. There are authors and podcasts that I follow pretty regularly that are, and I guess I say regularly, I will actually go through sort of waves of listening to somebody for a while, and then I'll move on to somebody else and then come back around, or reading. Good examples are like your Tim Ferriss's or your Gary Vaynerchuk's that are very, it tend to be sort of general businessy, but then they also have a lot of performance related stuff that's involved with that. But I've found that if I listen to one or two or read one or two authors too much, I get sort of a little myopic. I focus sort of on what they do. So I like to spread it out a little bit. And then there's also that spread of technology versus business. But a lot of it I get actually out. The podcast is great. Doing interviews is, I have talked to people about, they recommend any business should have a podcast because it gets your brand name out. Yep. I actually think the best benefit of a podcast is not getting your brand out, but actually talking to all of these people that are either customers or representatives of your customers or competition or industry people, that the amount of information you get back is just, it can be almost overwhelming. It's just an amazing source of like experience plus content, because now you're talking about their stories and what their background is. And then I've had a lot of my customers themselves help inform me a lot. There's a lot of times that I'll go into a customer that's got a specific niche or something that's a little different, and having those conversations with them about, okay, wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that was even a business. And yet you guys are, multi-million-dollar business in this area. Understanding that is incredibly enlightening, because then it's this area that you haven't thought about it, but then those things will translate back to other businesses and go, oh, hey, wait a minute, these guys are solving this same problem. They look at it very different, but it's really the same problem. And being able to, translate that across to that other industry that stuff keeps me, every day I get to the end of the day and I'm full of new stuff that I've learned.
Yeah, I'll certainly echo the podcast value piece. The things that I'm learning just about like what's out there. How are people getting themselves out there? How are they helping people? What can I learn from that? Either from, I can learn from that, maybe I can adapt and adopt some of those approaches, or particularly when it comes to the entrepreneurial side and the smaller business element, where you've got people who are coaches and facilitators and things. It's actually creating that wider network of, actually, you might not be able to get a big piece of work as a small organization, but if you just partner up with one or two others who have got close but overlapping skill sets, suddenly you've between the two or three of you, you can get something that's 10 times what any one of you could have got. So it's a wonderful,
definitely
about it. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So a couple of quick questions. If you could help any individual team or organization with the skill set that you've got, who would you want that to be?
I always want that to be people that are starting out. It pains me to see companies that struggle early on when it's things that are, people refer to them like rookie mistakes. It's just, they get into something and because they don't know that area. And usually for me, it's always, I can see the technology mistakes that they made. And then the cost of those downstream is often very big. And it's, boy, if I could get in earlier and just give a little bit of guidance, it can help them, maybe not completely avoid, but at least avoid a lot of that, or at least put them in a direction where they say, hey, we're making these decisions and we know that this cost is going to be coming because we made these decisions early on. And so I love to get in and be able to help people before they make mistakes, wherever I can say, hey, here's where I've seen these mistakes, or I've made these mistakes, and help show somebody else how to avoid those. That is to me the best time to step in.
Yeah. I'm smiling at myself. I've got a little memory of when I lived back in London with just me and my wife. We had a small one-bedroom apartment, and we were getting the flooring redone. And we bought the cheapest laminate flooring that we could have got, and we didn't have the time between us to actually fit it. So we got somebody in to fit this for us. And he came in, and afterwards he said, "If you'd have just had a conversation with me, the amount of time and labour that took, I could have halved, if not more, the labour and saved you a load of cost there, and you could have put a hardwood floor in there and it would have been, absolutely spot on. But you've gone for the cheap solution. With actually having that conversation up front could have saved you, maybe saved you some money. It might have cost you slightly more, but actually the quality that you would have got out of there would have been amazing."
Yeah, that's a perfect example of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wonderful. And if you could sit down and have a coffee, have a drink, or have a meal with somebody that you could learn from, who would you want that to be?
Yeah, this is one of those questions that pops up from time to time, and it's who's the greatest historical figure or something like that. I actually flip it a little bit and reject the question in a sense. Is that I find that anybody that I sit down and talk, like I can sit down with anybody and have a cup of coffee with them,
Yeah.
and they've always got an amazing story that it goes back, and I can learn from it, and there is something that I almost always have oh wow, that's that's really cool, or that's really interesting, or that's amazing. So I think that you don't have to go very far to get that kind of a conversation, that kind of a fulfillment out of communicating with somebody. I think if you just sit down with somebody and have a coffee at work or whatever, it's always worth the time. It's always a really good conversation. I always get a lot out of it. I always walk away going, man, I'm really glad that I did that. So it's what what they call the average Joe or anybody else, which is, again, that's part of why I like my job, is that I talk to these people in all these different areas of business, get to talk to different backgrounds, different experiences, different focus. And it's always a great time. It's always something I walk out of there going, wow, that was really awesome. I feel better. I feel like I have lived a fuller life having spent some time talking with them.
Brilliant. And finally, how do people find out more? How do they get in touch?
The two things we talk about, the podcast and RB Consulting. RB is you can go out to RB-SNS, the letter R, the letter B, the letter S, the letter N, the letter S.com, RB-SNS.com, and see what we do consulting wise. We have a free 30-minute consultation, which goes back to that whole idea. I would love for anybody that's about to step in anything, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And I may never talk to you again after that, but I'm hoping that at 30 minutes, I can at least give you a list of questions and ideas so that you don't make those mistakes, that you know how to go forward with that, and sort of a little bit more helping you know what you know. Developer side, it's DEVELPRENEUR, and we're out on wherever you do podcasts. It's also referred to as Building Better Developers, because when Amazon did the Alexa podcast, Developer didn't like that word as much. It was hard figuring out what that was. So we just said, okay, we're going to call that Building Better Developers on that side. And while it is very much, we do get into some technology stuff. We talk a lot about business and how to use technology, leveraging that for business. And there's also, you can go to developerpreneur.com for blog articles and podcast stuff. School.developerpreneur.com. We're just starting that in the last few months, and we've got free courses and paid courses, and they range. Right now, a lot of it is sort of technology introduction type stuff, but we're putting together an RFP, how to do a request for proposal and how to go through that process. Got some classes on that coming up, and then other just various technology stuff as we essentially translate the developer stuff that we've done for years now in blog and podcast, and put it in a more digestible class form.
Right. Oh, wonderful. As always, I'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes for people to check you out, and hopefully, I highly recommend anyone. I mean, I always think puts a smile on my face when people are offering that free consultation, because it's not generally, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm fairly sure this is the case. It's not about hard sell. It's not about trying to sell people something. It's just about having that conversation and seeing where the value can be added.
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. And yeah, you if you're anything like me trying to put a new laminate floor down, then don't regret not having the conversation. For the sake of 30 minutes of your time and learning something about the technologies and the things that are out there, why wouldn't you invest that, particularly when it comes to the expense of investing in some of these things going forward? So
Mhm.
brilliant.
Exactly.
Rob, fascinating chat, and thanks so much for joining us all the way from the States today. Have yourself a great day, and speak soon.
You do the same. Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me out here.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.